Welcome to Keeping It Green, a podcast for ornamental plant professionals and enthusiasts, with hosts Margaret Pickoff and Tim Abbey.
Hello, and welcome to Keeping It Green, a podcast from Penn State Extension for ornamental plant professionals and enthusiasts. I'm one of your hosts, Margaret Pickoff. I'm a horticulture educator with Penn State Extension, and each episode I'll be joined by one of my colleagues on the green industry team as a co-host. Today's episode, my co-host is Tim Abbey. Hello, Tim.
Hi, Margaret. How are you?
I'm doing well. We have a 60-degree day here in Philadelphia, so it's feeling really nice.
Yes, we'll let everybody judge what month this is, where it's
I
60
know.
degrees out.
So on today's episode, we'll be joined by Dr. Mark Brand from University of Connecticut's Department of Plant Science and Landscape Architecture. But before we get into our interview with Mark, we like to start out with a little check-in between extension educators to see what's going on in our world and what we're seeing either in the landscape or just in our line of work. And so for me, I just gave a talk last week or a couple days ago on invasive plant management, which is in line with our topic for today's podcast, but was lucky enough to get a couple of emails from fellow extension educators alerting me that a couple new plants were just added to the PDA's noxious weed list. And so now we have the additions of burning bush, Euonymus elatus, and 4 species of privet to Pennsylvania's noxious weed list. And that's not a huge surprise, but I'm always glad to get the little update. So I was able to change my PowerPoint at the last moment to have the latest information in there. But I guess we'll see how that addition affects our industry going forward. But that's something I've been thinking about and seeing. What about you, Tim?
Yeah, I mean, that'll be something we'll talk to Mark about, because New England states have been way ahead as far as phasing some of those plants out compared to Pennsylvania.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the interesting thing for me is probably in the last 5 days, there's been about a 50-degree temperature swing.
Yeah.
It's quite drastic, and it just seems very odd to be this warm right now.
Yeah, it sure does.
It's winter season though, and it's lots of presentations and not as much fun because you're not outside.
Yeah, although we could be.
Yes, we could be.
Yeah, I was talking to Brian Walsh, who is an extension educator who focuses mostly on spotted lanternfly, and we were talking about what this mild winter is going to do for populations of spotted lanternfly. We've had 2 cold snaps, really, and that's all. And so we'll have to see. We might have a big population boom this spring, but we'll have to see. Okay, well, wonderful. I think let's bring on our guest for today. Our guest is Mark Brand, professor of horticulture in University of Connecticut's Department of Plant Science and Landscape Architecture. So welcome, Mark.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, thanks so much for agreeing to do an episode with us. And so we usually like to start by asking our guest to describe their current role. So can you tell us a little about what you do at the University of Connecticut?
Sure. Well, I'm a professor of horticulture, as you said. So now I'm primarily a teaching and research appointment. When I started 34 years ago, I started out, I was 3/4 extension and 25% research. And then over the years, as retirements have occurred and so on, I've been shifted more into teaching. So the teaching that I do, I teach plant propagation course in the spring semester. And then in the fall, I teach the woody landscape plants course. And from time to time, I've taught a course on plant tissue culture. And then for my research, that's another significant part of what I do. And I'm mostly working with ornamental plants, although I have worked with nutraceutical fruit crop called aronia quite a bit recently. Then I do have some extension appointment, and my extension appointment is primarily to work with and try to help nursery producers, landscapers.
And Mark and I have shared some time together. I used to work in Connecticut, and I know since I departed the state, which is now over 16 years ago. I mean, your research is really, I'm trying to think of the right word to use. It's grown so much on all the work you've done with some of the invasive ornamental plants, particularly like barberry. And I think you also did work with burning bush and things like that. Can you give a little history of what was like the impetus to start that work?
Sure, with the invasives.
Yeah.
It was kind of at the request of the nursery industry. I think however many couple decades ago or so, the industry started to realize, that plants like barberry, Japanese barberry, and winged euonymus were bad invasive plants, and they were also significant crops for the nursery industry. And they wanted to get some answers or solutions to the problem so that they potentially wouldn't have to lose, those two species from what they could grow. And so we started out first looking at cultivars of Japanese barberry to see if there were differences in how prolific they were as far as seed set, to hopefully find some that were, quote, safe to grow. Same thing with the euonymus. We looked at cultivars of euonymus. We set out these big controlled studies and did a lot of painstaking picking of barberry fruits and getting hundreds of thorns in our hands and all of that good stuff. And it kind of turned out that there weren't that many cultivars that were safe enough. A lot of the other sort of experts were on the ecology side were saying, you almost have to have 0 seeds for a barberry to be safe. It has to be very low. So simultaneously, while we were working on cultivar evaluation, we started to do breeding work to try to come up with sterile forms of Japanese barberry in particular. That's the one that I focused on. So we spent quite a number of years developing sterile barberries.
Yeah, I think that's important, and I'll ask specifically, like the time frame for that when you're working with invasive species, whether it's a plant or an insect or vertebrate, that when you're trying to learn something about it, whatever that it might be, it's not something that you're typically going to be done and solved within a year. It's lots of time. So can you give a ballpark of like from when you started work with this until you developed what you wanted to and were able to release it?
Yeah. So, I mean, even just the evaluation part where we were looking at different barberry cultivars, we put a replicated planting in of about 45 different cultivars with 3 plants of each. So you have to get them in the ground, get them established. And even that, when we looked at the plants, when the majority of them started to fruit, there were some plants that appeared to be sterile. And then we waited 5 more years because we didn't want to make a mistake and call things too early. We waited 5 more years, went back and reevaluated the ones that had seemed to be low seed producing plants. And, lo and behold, almost all of them, started to produce more seeds than was acceptable. They just need a longer amount of time. These tend to be, the more compact dwarf forms. So, just doing that evaluation properly, takes probably at least a decade.
Wow.
But the breeding part, that probably, was a 15-year minimum amount of work, because you have to get the plants, you have to start to try to do the ploidy manipulation. That's what we did, trying to make polyploids with the goal of getting triploid polyploids that would be sterile. And it's it takes a long time to do that. And these plants throw different curves at you. Barberry, although it's a very prolific plant in the landscape, when you're trying to do breeding with it, it's not the easiest thing to make crosses on. And then once you finally have something that you think might be good, then you have to do this, absolute minimum 5-year, probably more like 10-year evaluation before you can feel confident to call it sterile or seedless, or only producing this number of seeds. So it's a long process with a woody perennial plant.
Who does and this is my own ignorance on the subject matter, who does or gives the final approval? Like when you got something that you think is really ready that could be bred and released, into the market, does anybody have to sign off on that?
As far as it being sterile?
Yeah, does USDA have to do anything?
The answer is that's all still pretty much up in the air. I think nationally, we definitely could use a system, some sort of clearinghouse that would give the thumbs up or thumbs down on things, but there hasn't been any funding coming forward for that. There's been a group that's tried to get something like that moving forward, but in the end, there's been no funding for it. So the way it typically happens, or all I can do is, I guess, explain what's happened with the barberries, is we at the university did what we thought was very thorough evaluation, allowed enough time to elapse to be sure they weren't setting things. We had plenty of opportunity for cross-pollination by all kinds of different barberries and different ploidy levels. And we collected the data over many years. Then you can submit that for a refereed journal article. And if it gets in a scientifically peer-reviewed journal article, that seems to be the standard that we're at now. And once you have that, I think that's as good as you can go. And then it's up to different state regulatory agencies to decide what they're going to do with that data, whether they're going to accept it or not.
Okay. Yeah, that's kind of what I was looking for.
In our case, the first state that accepted our data was New York State. And I believe just recently Pennsylvania accepted our data, and the 4 Japanese barberries, sterile ones that we introduced, are now or will be on an exemption list, I believe, for the barberry ban in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
That's good to know. Yeah, it's interesting that difference, there's no kind of overarching, like, yes, we accept this data, and we can confidently say for all states where this is growing that it's safe to do this, but it has to be done at the state level. And so and it seems kind of, and Tim mentioned this before we started recording, but that New England states have been a little bit ahead of the game in terms of identifying invasive species of plants as harmful and kind of taking action a little bit sooner than maybe here in Pennsylvania. So I find that interesting.
Yeah, I think it's some of it is that some of these plants have been in New England longer than they've been in other parts of the United States. So, a lot of these invasives have to kind of percolate for a while, and then eventually you realize, oh, we've got an invasion. And so I think just the fact that New England's been around for a long time, you see these things maybe a little earlier than you do in some other surrounding parts of the US. But and we also had person Les Merhoff, who was very at the leading edge of pointing out all of the bad invasives and the potential harm with them. And so he really drove the issue, at least in Connecticut, and I think regionally too.
Go
sorry.
ahead,
Go. I was just thinking, we've talked about how you focused on creating sterile cultivars, which obviously would curb the spread of these invasives by seed dispersal. Do you ever focus on other plant characteristics that kind of lead to bad outcomes? Like, for example, with Japanese barberry, there's a link between large populations of barberry and deer tick populations. The thought being that they create such dense, humid, warm habitat for both the ticks and the vectors of the ticks. And so where you have these big, dense clumps of barberry, you're also, you often have more deer ticks, and obviously that affects our human health through Lyme disease and other tick-borne diseases. But is there work that you know of that's, looking at how to create, or maybe there are cultivars that already do this, but how to, have a more open habit or a less dense mounding form than the straight species in order to kind of help solve that outcome, which is also, pretty risky for us humans.
Yeah, I think the problem there is that what the consumer wants in the plant habit may be the same thing that might make it supportive of tick populations. I mean, the consumer wants a dense, full looking Japanese barberry.
Right.
And I don't think, we've really looked at trying to breed a barberry that, would be not invasive and also not supportive of ticks. I mean, I kind of, my stance on the whole barberry and tick issue, barberries generally that are put in a landscape situation are not going to be growing together in the thickets that you might see in an unmanaged area. And I also think that the work that was done on associating ticks and barberry, they really only looked at dense barberry plantings, and they never did a comparison with dense native plants. And so,
right.
I think it's more a function of the high humidity, which helps the ticks thrive. So anything that's going to grow together in a thicket is probably going to support a tick population. So my own personal feeling about that whole issue is it's been sort of promoted also as a way of trying to sort of deep six the barberries. Because if you can get rid of barberry if you get everybody in an alarm mode about ticks and barberries.
Right.
That's just me.
And that, I mean, that
Well,
I think about this a lot with the with how I'm teaching about invasive plants, because there is very much a sort of black and white, bad versus, good versus evil kind of narrative out there about, like everything that is native is good and healthy for the ecosystem and our wildlife, and everything that is either non-native or invasive is, particularly the invasive plants are pure evil and have to be eradicated. And, the breeding work that you do is kind of an acknowledgement that there are a lot of attributes to these plants that we like, and that's why they're here. That's why they were brought over. Most of them were brought over here in the first place, is that we found them beautiful and functional in our landscapes, and they also have this tendency to spread really aggressively, or have these other characteristics that are not desirable. But it is kind of an acknowledgement that there's some good there too that we might want to hang on to, if we can kind of tamp down the aggressive spread part. But I have found that interesting, and as I've sort of been teaching about invasive plant management, have found that I support a bit of a more nuanced vision than I did when I started, which was pretty much like, only plant natives. So I'm kind of curious, like, do you run into that a lot in your line of work? Like, I know that you do some work with native plants as well. But do you encounter, people who are kind of like, why are you focusing on finding cultivars of these invasive plants, why shouldn't we all just be planting only natives in our landscapes?
Yes, that happens all the time. Whenever I go and talk about the barberry at all, there's always a certain segment of the audience that I feel wants to run up on stage and drag me off and beat me in the corner, because they do have it's like all barberry is bad and it's just a horrific thing, and how could you possibly be working on this plant and trying to keep it going, and so that is an issue. And natives are great, but like in the case with the barberry, part of the reason why it's so successful is that the deer won't eat it, and we have way too many deer out there, and they browse away on the native plants, killing them off, and then the barberry just doesn't get eaten, comes in to fill in. But with the natives, I also try to promote natives. I very much like using natives whenever possible. And there's always this discussion about whether to use just sort of seed grown wild material from an area versus a cultivar of a native plant. And most of the time the wild forms don't have the appearance that the consumer is going to want. And while, maybe 5% of the population appreciates a seed grown sort of more wild looking version of a plant, the other 95% want a nice little bush for their yard, and they want the cultivar. And so I try to, find the middle ground where it's better to have a cultivar of a native perhaps than just an exotic species that might be invasive, potentially.
I want to take this, stick with the invasives here for a little bit longer. But I know, the last few years when I was in Connecticut and then after I left, the industries up there, the container growers, they were concerned about barberry being phased out and burning bush and potential economic impact of that crop loss. But because those New England states are farther ahead on this issue than Pennsylvania, which has just started to get some of these on the noxious weed list, how is the nursery industry, if they're adapted to that? Have they found new plants to market? And again, maybe those are more native, but also some of the stuff you're working on that they can sell. Have they seen a significant major negative economic impact, or have they recovered?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think they really have the bans and so on have all been done with phase out periods, so they've been able to get their inventory down and before it really became a problem. And then they have either switched to sterile cultivars of a plant like Japanese barberry and gotten rid of all the invasive forms in their production, or there's just new material coming on, whether it's native plants or some other new cultivars of other plants that they've already been growing. So they've just kind of switched their product line and the way they market things. So it doesn't seem like it's caused a major problem.
Well, it seems like as consumers become more interested and educated about how plants in their landscape affect their surrounding ecology, and sort of I think they're more keyed into those dynamics maybe than ever before. But I would think that the consumers would be receptive to those changes in the market as well, that there being a greater availability of natives or I wonder if there maybe was a little bit of a lag time, but then the consumers sort of caught up and now appreciate the alternatives that are provided as a result of those bans.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think, consumers, they go and they buy what's sort of on the shelves or in the garden center or the box store. And, And if there's no barberries there to buy or whatever other invasive plant, they'll just they look at what's there and choose what they like from what's available. I think most people are not going in going, I have to have, this plant or that plant, maybe occasionally, but it's not a primary driver in the sort of marketplace.
Then a lot of them take those plants home and don't plant them properly anyway, and they die off, and they just got to replace them with something else.
Right.
Which is great for the
The
industry.
nursery industry.
Yeah. Doubles their sales.
Yeah.
I'm just voicing one of my pet peeves that, the biggest, woody plant issue that I encounter, doing site visits for landscapes or parks or whatever is just human error, usually at the time of planting or with a little of the aftercare right after planting. For the future of horticulture, I know with your work, and again, referencing my time in Connecticut, with the university, more of the biogenetics. Do you think that that's still going to be a focus in horticulture to the point that maybe some of the kind of, I don't use the word basic, but like the kind of applied type of research, old fashioned, is biotech still going to be a big component going forward?
I think it's going to be a component, and as the technologies mature, it'll get employed and used when it's appropriate. But I think there's also been a recognition of the value of some of the more traditional approaches and how it all has to be kind of blended together properly to make progress on some of the challenges that we're going to be and already are facing in horticulture.
Yeah,
So,
I think I just raised that point because my son will be going off to college this coming fall, wants to study horticulture, and he's just more of like a dirt guy. He just wants to be outside, like digging and planting and growing things. And I've told him, a lot about, like work that you do and other people, whether it's related to plants or insects or whatever, that's, that more down to that genomic level. And I think he finds it interesting, but I don't think it's something like he wants to pursue, so that's why I kind of raised that point.
yeah. I mean, the buzz right now in horticulture seems to be controlled environment agriculture. At least as far as, what I'm seem to be reading and where a lot of the positions are going these days. But, things have their ebbs and flows, but, I think there's a place for all of it to work together.
Is there, based on the student population that you work with as an instructor, have you noticed a change, like any big changes in the student population, kind of what their interests are? And does that tell you anything about the future of the field?
Yeah, I mean, I have noticed changes. I'm not sure what it tells us about the future necessarily, but I mean, there's a lot of students that come in that are solely interested in cannabis. So that's brought a different sort of cohort of students in. I think more students are interested in fruits and vegetables, or kind of sustainable horticulture, for lack of a better term. And it seems like currently there are fewer students who are interested in ornamental horticulture and sort of landscape horticulture than there have been in the past. But I expect this will, the pendulum will swing again, because I don't know, 20 years ago in our department, we were phasing out fruits and vegetables because students weren't interested in it, and everybody was interested in ornamental horticulture. And now it's, it's swung a little, I think, a little away from ornamental horticulture, and I'm sure it will come back. It's just a matter of, going through these sort of cycles.
Yeah. when I was working in consumer horticulture at the start of the pandemic, there was such a shift towards making landscapes really functional, producing food and producing things that we could use. And it seemed kind of like an interesting response to the sort of collective worry that we were all feeling during the pandemic. Was like, I need to produce my own food. I have to, grow things that I can use. And so it doesn't surprise me that your students have kind of more recently shifted towards thinking about production rather than just ornamental beauty.
Yeah, I think it's also, I think that you're exactly right. When the pandemic hit, everybody kind of dropped into survival mode and was looking at, fruits and vegetables as something they could, grow and have access to without having to depend on outside supplies. I think also simultaneously what's probably been going on, at least this is what I believe I've understood from others, is that people are moving away from the sort of traditional model of the single family, residence, your house with a yard that, you could landscape, and that's what you did. And increasingly these days, people, don't want any of that responsibility for maintaining a yard. They want, a condo where someone else does it, or just the next generation seems to be less focused on possessions and, and that kind of thing. And so if you don't have people, buying sort of the American dream home, then they're not buying plants to put in the landscape, but they might buy, a couple of, determinate growing tomatoes to put in a pot on their patio or something. It's more like a, 12 by 12 backyard kind of a mentality that's, caused this shift. And whether it shifts back, who knows? But I think that's at play as well.
Yeah, that's so
Is your work
interesting.
with Aronia focused more on like the ornamental aspect, or is it kind of tied into like the edible landscaping?
Yeah, well, the Aronia, I tried to approach it from both of those angles, because Aronia can be a nice ornamental, it's a pretty adaptable shrub, multi-stemmed, can colonize an area a little bit, and it's got flowers and fruit and good fall color. But certain types anyway have large blueberry sized fruits that are the highest fruit in antioxidants, anthocyanins, and total phenolics of anything you can grow, way better than black currants and blackberries and blueberries. And the only thing that comes close is the tropical acai palm fruits. So I everything I've been doing with Aronia, it's like a dual track thing where, you can do things on the ornamental side and also on the fruit side.
I think you used a term earlier, nutraceutical. Can you give us a definition of that?
Well, I guess it is something, in the case of Aronia, it's a berry, a fruit that if you eat it because it's healthy, it's got potential health benefits. So those high anthocyanins or antioxidants and phenolics, at least by some of the research, if you consume those, it's good for your body and high, nutritive value. So it's kind of things you can grow and eat and have it be a healthy food.
Well, with all of your, interesting and, impressive horticultural achievements over your decades-long career, I want to ask you about what might be the crowning achievement of them all was the time that you served as a consultant on a Hallmark movie.
Oh my gosh.
I didn't know
Yes.
about this, so I just looked online. I'm like, oh, I got to hear about this.
Oh, and I know it's there's been a lot, made of that. Really, all I did with that was they were doing a story. The screenwriter was was putting together the story and needed or wanted to have factual information about, what's realistic with Christmas tree growing in a Christmas tree plantation, and could an extension person that worked with Christmas trees, bring about a solution for this grower in this, Hallmark romance story.
Whoa.
So it was really minor, just kind of answering some questions for the screenwrite, so that she wasn't proposing something that was completely off the wall for a Christmas tree extension person to be able to do.
I think it's cool though. I mean, like I got to track this movie down now and see it.
I still haven't seen it, but I've heard
you,
some
me, and the
people
Christmas
like it.
trees.
Yeah, you're
Oh,
right.
wow. I'm actually really impressed that they would go to that like level of effort. Just that's not the level of detail that I and like correct information that I associate with those movies. And I feel like the cliche Hallmark movie is like, person comes back from their high-powered city job and falls in love with the owner of the local Christmas tree farm. And so
Right.
the fact that they were like, we got to make this, a factually correct, knowledgeable Christmas tree grower. I give them props for doing that.
Yeah, I mean, they at least put the effort in. I like I said, I still haven't seen the final product, so I don't know whether they followed what I said or took more liberties to make the story more enjoyable.
I think the liberties they take are actually the true storyline is the fantastical, stuff that everything works out perfectly and
right.
It's all wonderful. But yeah, they probably got all the nitty gritty details right, but the rest of it's wacky. I still think it's cool though.
It is. Do you still do work with Christmas trees?
Not so much. When I first started at UConn, we redid the Southern New England Christmas tree grower manual, I think it was called. And since then, I haven't had a real active role with Christmas trees. I get questions. If people have questions, it's either myself or Tom Worthley in our natural resources department that answers the questions. So I'm still involved, but not quite as much. There's more than enough to do in the nursery area. So
yeah. Before we sort of start winding down our conversation, I did just want to give a little plug for another part of your work, which is the UConn plant database, which is this really fantastic resource for anyone who is interested in choosing a plant for their landscape or learning more about specific species. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the development of that database, but I can say, I've used it, even though we're not in Connecticut, but I reference it often, and it's a really great online resource.
Oh, well, good. I'm glad you find it useful. That is something that I kind of got it underway when I started teaching the woody landscape plant course, and in the beginning it was supported by a USDA higher education challenge grant. So we got some money to put it together, and the thought in the beginning was a lot of the universities, and we were dealing with the ones in New England at the time. You go out on campus and you do walks around campus, looking at trees and so on. And so at the crux of it was what we were calling virtual plant walks. So kind of it was an online version where students could go back and redo the walk sort of virtually on the computer with visuals and information. And so that was kind of what drove it, and then all of the information had to be there in order for it to be useful, and it was a shoestring kind of a thing. I had a server in my lab that I maintained, which was always problematic because every once in a while it would go down, and then I'd start to get emails like your server's down, we can't get to the site and all this stuff. So you have to come running in on the weekend and try to restart things. And I wish I'd kept up with it a little bit better than I have. When I first put it together, I really envisioned having time to grow it and add more plants and more pictures and that kind of thing. And it's been hard to accomplish that. But there's also just been technical issues. It's hard with that kind of a project to keep up with the computer side of it. I mean, back when I started it, I was doing all the HTML coding myself, and then things just get more complicated, and getting tech support can be challenging. But I think a lot of people have used it over the years, and hopefully it's not become too obsolete yet.
No, it's a great reference. The photos are really good, very detailed, and a lot of good information about many different species. It seems.
I think it was one of the first ones out there, and then there's quite a few others now, but at least for a while we were ahead of the curve.
Yeah, I want to thank you, Mark, because he contributed photos from that site to the online landscape workforce development project that myself and Margaret and Tom and Sandy and others, Ruth Benner from Penn State Extension, worked on. So thanks, Mark, for helping us out.
Yeah, sure.
I guess as we come to pretty much the close, I just want to take the chance, because I haven't seen Mark in a number of years. I just want to thank him for all the support that he gave me when I started my first real job. He was on the search committee that hired me at the University of Connecticut back in '94. That a lot of time has passed, but I'm still very thankful for you taking a chance on me. And
oh yeah, well, I wish we still had you here at UConn.
I still miss New England. I still do.
So Mark, we like to end our interviews by asking a personal question of our guests. So if you wouldn't mind sharing, what do you like to do when you're not working?
Yeah, well, as I was mentioning to you before we got started, I am an avid keeper of tropical fish, both freshwater and saltwater. I don't know the exact number, but it's over 1,000 gallons of water in a fish room in my basement that my wife let me construct. So it's a lot of work, but I really enjoy it. One of my sons is involved in runs a pet store, and I get to go with him to wholesalers in the New York City area, and that's a blast, going and seeing all the really interesting things that come in from all over the world. So fish keeping is a great hobby. I'd recommend it to anybody who's got a little bit of patience. And the other thing I like to do is sea kayaking.
Oh.
So that's sometimes I go off the Connecticut shore. Also like to go up in Maine, off the Maine coast.
Wow.
So great spots up there.
Yeah, that sounds beautiful.
As I get older, I get a little more wary about it, though. The ocean is unforgiving.
That's for sure.
Never. We can defeat time. We're going to live forever, right?
Yeah, right.
Wow.
Right.
Well, that Maine water is cold, so.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Mark.
Yes,
It's
thank you,
been
Mark.
delightful, talking to you and hearing more about the work you've done over a long career. Thanks for contributing, that information and that insight. And we're really happy to have you as a guest.
Yeah, thank you very much, Margaret. And it's been great to spend some time with you again, Tim.
Thanks, Mark.
All right. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.